Good morning, friends. I am Frank Fagnone, President and CEO of Old Salem Museums and Gardens and the Museum of Early Southern Decorative Arts. I want to welcome each and all of you to this really incredibly important partnership presentation, Migration Patterns, presented by Lamar E DeLoatch. This partnership is part of our Hidden Town project, and that project is managed by our Director of Moravian Research, which is Martha Hartley. And what I'd like to do is have Martha come on, introduce the program today, perhaps tell you a bit more about the Hidden Town project. And again, I welcome all of you. I'm excited to hear this presentation. If you would jump on, Martha.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Frank. It's wonderful to be here. 5 years ago, it was under Frank's leadership that the Hidden Town Project was initiated to build on decades of work at Old Salem to research and reveal the history of people of African descent, free and enslaved. These people and their descendants are among the founders and builders of Salem, and thus Winston-Salem. The Hidden Town Project is a research-based project focused on identifying people and building their biographies, as well as understanding their lives within the white Moravian world. Moravian archives records are invaluable to the work. Volunteers and interns are of great help in the research, and longtime volunteer Moy Lowe joins us for the session this morning. In addition to research, community engagement remains a critical component of the Hidden Town Project through collaboration, education, and public awareness. Understanding truth and history is basic to the conversation. The legacy of slavery is durable and present today. Genealogy plays an important role in our Hidden Town work, and many of you all know Mel White, who is the director of African-American programming at Old Salem in the 1990s and early 2000s. And while at Old Salem, Mr. White created a genealogy database that is a wealth of information. His work and our Hidden Town research are available to researchers. If your ancestors were in the Winston-Salem area, you may want to peruse our files. Research appointments are available starting this spring, and all you need to do is contact me. So I'll put my email in the chat. Our presenter this morning is the president of the Piedmont-Triad Chapter of the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society, known as OGS. And Old Salem is a member, and we greatly appreciate what we gain from this membership. This organization is a great source of information and education. Their monthly meetings have excellent programs, and their network of knowledge is generously shared. So I encourage you to think about becoming a member, and I'll also share their website link in the chat. So let's see where we are here. And it is my honor to introduce our workshop speaker this morning, Mr. Lamar E DeLoatch. Mr. DeLoatch has been a genealogical compiler and researcher for 42 years. He is a native of Northampton County, North Carolina, with deep roots in Eastern North Carolina, and has traced his family history back to the castles in France and also to places in Africa. In addition, he has family roots in the Native American nations of Cherokee, Creek, Nansemond, Saponi, and Tuscarora. His family is descendant of the Somerset Place Plantation, a state historic site in Washington County, North Carolina. Mr. DeLoatch refers to himself as an American of African and Native American descent. In 1998, he co-founded the Piedmont-Triad Chapter of the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society, which of course is OGS. He is currently president and leading the preparation for the chapter's 25th anniversary next year. The OGS national organization is headquartered in Washington, D.C., with chapters across the country, like the Piedmont-Triad Chapter. Mr. DeLoatch has also fostered the establishment of 3 additional chapters in North Carolina, the Triangle, the Sandhills, and Charlotte. Mr. DeLoatch attended Elizabeth City State University for Social Sciences, the National Executive Institute for Public Administration, and Auburn University for Vocational Evaluation Services. For over 49 years, he has been a business owner consultant in transportation, tours, and travel, and he is a farmer. He served on the City of Greensboro as Minority Women Business Enterprise Board for 17 years and as a Human Relations Commissioner for the City of Greensboro for 8 years. He is founder of the Northeast Project Incorporated, a CDC, and he serves currently as a mentor for new and startup businesses. In 2018, he was presented the Old North State Award by Governor Roy Cooper for his work and genealogical research in his community and for the state of North Carolina. We are indeed honored to have Mr. DeLoatch share his expertise with us this morning. His presentation is Migration Patterns, an Alternative for Locating African-American Origins. Welcome, Mr. DeLoatch, and thank you.
Thank you, Martha, and thank Old Salem for having me. Knowing your family history will help you chart your future. For those that are joining us, if you have questions, put them in the chat, and then about halfway through, we will get to those questions. But first of all, I want to start out by saying that we are a nation of records and immigrants. We need the past to move forward. Just a little about me. I was born in a village, Northampton County, called Casey, North Carolina, thinking that I was a Black French Indian, Black because of my skin, French because of my last name, surname, Indian because my mother often took me to powwows in Ahoskie, North Carolina. I grew up in a county that really the public school system did not inform me much about American slavery at all. My ancestors were left out of the textbooks that was given to us by the county. And my question always have been, who am I? And I was often told that I did not have a history. Not until I entered Elizabeth City, that a history professor informed me that we had a history. And then what happened was I switched my major from biology to social science. At the same time, later on, I saw the TV show Roots in 1977 by Alice Haley. And that summer of '78, I got busy interviewing my grandparents and the elders in my hometown. For your young people, we had no internet, okay? And again, this was 1978, and no social media. So I spent my times and days during the summer interviewing my relatives, spending days in the courthouse, searching records, later into genealogical libraries on the state level and the archives in Raleigh, and then from there to the National Archives in Washington, D.C. So I hope you enjoy this presentation, and we'll get started now. And dealing with migration patterns, okay, and to deal with genealogy, okay, our ultimate goal is to seek out the truth. And Ida B. Wells made a statement, the way to the right, the wrong, is to turn the light of the truth upon them. So to understand history, to even get involved with genealogical research, you have to like history. My goal is to point out some resources to build upon our current genealogical knowledge, to specify and identify specific sources to locate African Americans, to also seek out some of the myth about history and genealogy of Black people or people of color. But my main thing today is to focus in on the timeline of the migration patterns. Okay, Tony Barrows has a book called Black Roots, and he stated that you need to collect a lot of information about slavery before you can successfully trace and your ancestry during slavery. So, as I stated before, we are a nation of records, from the caves to the Bible, from the libraries in Timbuktu to the Library of Congress to the National Archives. This is the most way that I was able to trace my family history. But to understand some of the most common reason for migrating, again, ranging from religion, wars, and economic problems, slavery, relocation, and financial opportunities, all has a play in migration patterns. Today, I want you all to think outside the box. I want you to be patient. I want you, if you have questions, as I stated before, put it in the chat. And again, as I tell my genealogical members, I want you to document, validate, okay, verify, and again, pray for guidance. First, we're going to start with the first human migration out of Africa, going from west to east. For some of you all that do not know, that the Alaskan was connected through with Europe through the Bering Strait. There was land before it became water. We also have the path of Asian migration across the Bering Strait down to Mesoamerican. The first human to arrive in North America was about 12,000 years ago. And then the Native Americans, okay, that migrated from East Asia, they were first called the first Americans. The first European arrived in North America were the Norse, traveling from Greenland about 985. And then from 1305 to 1312, we had kings and from Africa and places such as Abu Baran II really had a fleet of ships that sailed the Atlantic to America. But during the early civilization of Mesoamerica, okay, we had during the 1310 to 1491, the Mandingo merchants that explore areas and had over 50 some odd trips to the Caribbean, South America, Central America, points that include Panama, Honduras, and Haiti. Now, during the 1513, Ponce de Leon, okay, landed on the Florida coast and to present-day city, what we call St. Augustine. And Juan Garrido, okay, joined Leon, Ponce de Leon, and was documented, as I stated again, documented being the first Black person to arrive in America. He is also known as the first Black conquistador. People of African descent migrated in what now we call the Western United States back in 1521, originated from central Mexico area, okay? And they were called the Black Maroons. Again, this gives you an idea of what the transatlantic slave trade took place. It started in 1526 all the way up to 1866. Now, the Middle Passage is what we are familiar with, and they, again, were documenting slaves from 1619 to 1807. Three out of every 4 slaves from East Africa died. They died from hunger en route to America. Slave trades captured and sent over 12.5 million enslaved Africans to America. Now, approximately 10.7 million survived the passage, and about 5 to 6% enslaved African entered the United States. Now, over 57% of African entered the United States through the port of Charleston. So as I tell people of color and African Americans, this is our main port of entry, not Ellis Island. Today, about 70% of America can trace their family back to Charleston, South Carolina, and more than 12,000 ships made over 40,000 some odd voyages within a 350-year span period there. This will give you an idea about the port of entry, running from Maine all the way down to South Carolina and Georgia. 1526, the first enslaved Africans, okay, and 600 colonists arrived in Weymouth Bay. Basically, this is east of South Carolina, really. Mainly, it was a Spanish expedition, okay? And a month later, this group of people moved down to Georgia. The enslaved African from the province of Carolina and Georgia eventually moved down to Florida. And a lot of them, if they were slaves, they escaped. And I tell people this was the first underground railroad that took place. From 1563 to 1820, African slave trade was in Spanish America, as we call it, okay, which was transcribed by Charles Ransdell from Mexico and North America. And the North American states were like Texas, Florida, and Louisiana. And then during September the 8th of 1565, the oldest city in the United States that basically had slaves, okay, and this was again 1856, was in St. Augusta, Florida. And today, if you're looking for records to help you with your genealogical research, the Cathedral of Basilicas in St. Augusta, Florida, basically has records that are dated back to the 1594. You got Wanella, okay, was also an African interpreter. He was also a shipwreck back in 1562. You can find documents on him also in the archives there. You also had the Black Spanish militia, which were made up again of African enslaved African that became free. This was also during the 1700s. And the point I'm making right now is that sometimes we have a tendency to talk about the 1619, but we don't look back further than that. The first Ronald Island was established by, pretty much everybody knows, Ralph Lane in 1585 in the Ronald Island in Dare County, North Carolina. Now, I can relate to the next set of information here that I have set up. In 1586, Sir Francis Drake left about 300 enslaved Africans called Black Maroon on Ronald Island, North Carolina, mainly to make room for people that Ralph Lane had basically bought over with him. And this was done mainly because of people were starving, and he had to make room for them to take them back to England. So he left the 300 enslaved Maroons Black maroons. And what people need to know is that over in England, there are documentations that show that Sir Francis Drake had about 40 to 50 some odd ships at the time that this took place. Even during the second colony that were trying to establish here in the United States, that were led by John White, 1587, and then I think in 1590, that is when the whole group was missing, disappeared, and we end up calling it the Lost Colony. On January 1606, Augustine and Francisco was born. The first American son in the United States, and the records again can be found back in the Cathedral Basilicas there in Florida. Migration settlements. There were other settlements, people familiar with the 13 colonies, that people from the upper part of the colony, from the Boston area, Massachusetts area, moved down, and it showed you different patterns, different trails settlement that the people settled along with the enslaved people. And this settlement took place from 1587 to 1776. The colony of Jamestown entered into a new era about 1607. Also, Native Americans at that time were used more so than Africans, the enslaved Africans. From 1607 to 1715, over 2 million Native American was sent to the British Caribbean and the other US colonies. Natives worked on plantations in the Caribbean, New England, and the Middle and Carolina colonies also. And this here I'll give you a map of an idea about their routes and how they were transported from one area to another, all the way down to the Caribbean. And this again mainly dealt with the Native Americans. Now, we often hear about Jamestown, about 1619, about the 20 enslaved Africans. Well, during that time, they were not registered as enslaved Africans. They were registered as indentured servants. They were not slaves. There were no slave laws at that time. Now, Virginia passed the laws in 1662, okay? And again, if a black child was born during that time, they were not listed as an enslaved person, especially if they were born by a white female. Massachusetts became the first colony to legalize slavery in America. In 1655, John Casor, okay, a servant at that time as he was born, but then he became the first person of African descent in the 13 colonies to be declared as a slave, and this was 1655. He was owned by, they called him really April Johnson, but his real name was Anthony Johnson. He was a black slave owner, and he ended up owning slaves eventually in the Carolina colonies, which later became North and South Carolina. During the 1700s, the enslaved Africans in the northern and southern colonies often fled to places like Cuba and to present-day Tampa Bay area. Okay, And again, as I stated before, 1705 eventually became the Virginia Slave Codes and the slave laws. Then 1712, the province of Carolina, the Carolina colony split. And again, when they split, it became North Carolina and South Carolina. And again, you had slaves that was arriving from the Carolina colony that end up in Virginia and South Carolina. Majority of the slaves, as I stated before, enter in South Carolina between 1735 and 1775. They were exported to Georgia and North Carolina. And the reason why I'm telling you the dates, and so you can see what is going on, if you start searching for your family members, you have to remember that people did not stay still at all. They moved from one colony to another colony based on economic development, based on wars, as I stated earlier, on some of those reasons for people migrating. Spain welcomed slaves from the British colonies, and that's the reason why St. Augustine basically was set up. The all-Black settlement in Fort Morris in 1738 was set up. There was an all-Black colony. The Carolina slave codes came in 1740. Laws were also changed for free people of color because a lot of the Africans was free. They fell under the category of free people of color. In the 1760, the laws changed for them. In 1779, the Virginia land grants end up giving European and even Spanish people basically end up establishing settlements and missions and farm based on the land grants that was given out. In 1781, hundreds of Spanish-speaking Black settlers really found and populated towns such as St. Antonio, Texas, all the way from there to San Francisco, California. And then this will also give you an idea of, again, people towards the movement, migration movement. People now starting to move from the East Coast to the West Coast. As I started my presentation, I was showing you the movement from East to the West. And now during the 1770s, you're starting to have them from the East to the West, instead of coming from the West to the East. As I mentioned before, the second Underground Railroad took place in 1786 to 1865. And most of us is familiar with the Underground Railroad. Again, when you had almost over 100,000 some enslaved African that was escaped, on the Underground Railroad. About 10,000 of them fled to Canada. Harriet Tubman and Will Seals were people that helped with this movement. Harriet Tubman rescued over 300 some enslaved people, had over 19 missions. And again, records were kept by the abolitionists that was involved with the railroad, but you also had the 1793 future slave laws that took place. And this is the Underground Railroad. North Carolina did not refer to it as the Underground Railroad. They referred to it as Freedom Road. And again, this is a map showing the different migration that the enslaved people took. 1790, okay, was the first U.S. census. that took place during this time. This is when we also had what we call the second passage. I refer to it as the second middle passage. And one of the reasons that's because during the 1808, okay, the importation of slaves became illegal. And then once that took place, they had labor shortages. They were depleting the nutrition from the land, okay? And then so what you had was you had slaves, thousands of enslaved Africans was transported from Virginia and North Carolina down to plantations in Mississippi. Then you also had what we call illegal slave trading that took place. That came in through the New Orleans area heading up to Mississippi. And again, this can be documented in slave ship manifests that from 1807 to 1860. And this is to give you an idea of the plantations, about 2 million some enslaved Africans during this time. And the dots that you see in Virginia and Maryland and North Carolina area, okay, this was during the 1830. So you get an idea what was taking place for its plantations. You had 319,000 some in free Africans also during this period. And this is showing you a graphic design, basically a drawing of those enslaved people on their trek from Virginia and North Carolina to Mississippi. And as I stated before, Virginia really led the migration. It became known as the slavery Trail of Tears. One of the reasons because cotton became king in the deep South. And again, over 450,000 some people was uprooted and sent south. Women and children, enslaved women and children walked anywhere from 20 to 40 miles each day. This gives you an idea of the map. There were some that were shipped around through the Atlantic Ocean over to the Gulf of Mexico, to give you an idea of what took place. And most historians refer to this as the domestic slave trade, again, and this took place from 1808 to 1865. This is showing you the illegal slave trade that took place, slaves being smuggled into the United States, up through the Gulf and up to the Mississippi. The Guerrero basically was one of those ships, which is being researched as we speak. That was in 1827. You had 41 that died during that time out of the 560 some enslaved people that took place really on that ship. As I stated before, cotton became king, especially when the invention of the cotton gin in 1793. Mississippi was the largest cotton producer state in the United States in 1860. And the reason why this is so important, if you look at our oil that we receive from other countries today, cotton was just as equal to what you see that was going on as far as our resources that we needed. In 1820, okay, Mississippi had over 33,000 some odd slaves, okay? And again, during 1860, approximately 437,000 slaves. And they had over 46,000 some odd plantations. Convict leasing played a major role from 1846 to 1870, okay, hundreds of blacks from southern states such as Alabama and Mississippi basically took part in the whole convict leasing piece. And this gives you an idea of the slave states, the freedom states, especially for young people that don't understand what was taking place. Georgia also had auctions on a daily basis. Some of them refer to that as the weeping time, mainly because family was divided up. And so the Butler family was one of the major families in South Carolina, and also Philadelphia, basically that dealt with some of the Sea Islands, and for its moving slaves from the Sea Islands also down to Mississippi. This is 1860. If you look at the map now, look at the plantations, look at Mississippi. Okay. In 1860, you have 4,441,000 some odd thousands of enslaved people, and you have 487 free Africans at that time in 1860. This is just a news article talking about the Middle Passage and moving slaves from North Carolina, Nash County area, okay, all the way down to Alabama, that was taken to Alabama, taken to Mississippi, and it's showing you the price of this, and this was done in the Federal Observer. This was back in 1835. During the domestic migration, you can find documentation and the slave owners' Bibles, the wills and the deeds, slave schedules from one year to another year, and also look at the census records that show you basically slaves moving from one place to another. The Cotillo was the last registered ship to move to bring Africans to Alabama, and this was West Africa, and they were talking about 110 some African that was transported at that time during 1860, and this is called the Cotillo. The next movement that I want to talk about is the Liberian movement. Paul Coffey, okay, and for some of y'all, I'm not talking about Marcus Garvey, okay, movement. This is just Paul Coffey was the first one to deal with the back to Africa, the back to Africa Liberian movement. There were also different societies set up, and the society was set up by Quakers and liberal whites that did not agree with slavery. The Maryland State Colonization Society was established. They also established a colony in Liberia. Virginia and Mississippi had also established a colony for former slaves and free blacks also. And again, it was headed by Paul Coffey. And now here you see an underground railroad that was used for the Liberian migration, okay? And you had people coming from different states to board ships, okay, to go back to Africa, okay? And one reason why I can relate to this, because we had about 250 some blacks from my hometown, in my county area, also that took part in this migration also. What happened was free people of color was losing the right to vote during 1835s also. They were losing their freedom. Laws were changing so that they can basically control what was going on. Over 15,000 some African Americans was granted independent in 1847, and basically under the pressure of Great Britain to also to make sure that this movement happened. the Native American. The Trail of Tears. Most people have heard about the Trail of Tears and they're dealing with Native Americans. And the reason why this is important for Black American is because the Native American also owned slaves, enslaved Africans. But the Trail of Tears took place in 1830 to 1877. The 5 civilized tribe mainly was the tribes that a lot of the focus was on: the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, the Creek, and the Seminole. In Martha introduction, I mean, she was telling you about my Native American background, and that was one of the reasons why I looked into this. The Indian Removal Act of 1830, under the leadership of President Andrew Jackson, the movement was all about land. The Native American had fertile land, clear land, and again, over 100,000 some Native Americans was relocated to Oklahoma, to the west. About 25,000 were enslaved Africans, okay? And most the information about the Native American can be found in the Indian index rolls, such as the Doss rolls, the Baker rolls, the Hunter rolls, okay? You won't find Native Americans in early US census. You will only find them probably starting more or less in the 1900 census. Just to give you an idea, the Cherokee owned about over 6,600 enslaved individuals in 8 different states. The Seminoles, you see 6,000, over 6,000. The Choctaw, over 4,000. The Creek, over 3,000. And then you have the Chickasaw and Indian, also owning enslaved Africans. This is the Trail of Tears to give you an idea how they were moved from Florida and North Carolina over to the Indian Territory, to the state of Oklahoma. And again, this here kind of give you the Native American Indian frontier, where Native Americans eventually was located and moved to. Early pioneers, Black early Westerns, early Black, during the Black, I would call it cowboy time. Most of the people that you have heard about was Bass Reeves, which is back during the day was the Lone Ranger. Again, you saw Black pioneer women led the way also westward, all the way out to California, and during the 1840s. One person that stays in my mind right now is Stagecoach Murray, Murray Fields, really. I think it was Murray Fields, but she was a stagecoach driver, African-American female. Black cowboys, as I mentioned before, Bass Reeves, again, took place, and percentage of people basically moving west from the 1860s and also up to the 1830s. You had between 1870 and 1890, some over 30,000 Black migrants settled in Kansas. This was the Homestead Act of 1862. The 1862 Homestead Act allowed them to purchase land for $1.25 an acre. So if you find your people there, some of them did own land. You had the wagon train era also that took place from 1840 to 1880. Most of them used the Santa Fe Trail. Black wagon train owners, enslaved people, Black wagon train, I can relate to that mainly because the weavers in my family also end up going to the Indiana, near the Gary, Indiana area, leaving from Virginia and North Carolina. I also had the Smiths leaving from Berkeley County, North Carolina, heading towards Nashville, Tennessee area, the Smiths in the wagon train. So I'm familiar with that. Most of the wagon train people kept logs. They ran the wagon train as though it was a rolling city on wheels. A lot of the people that were got caught up in the free people of color, that caught into the slave laws revised act in 1850, which they was taking people that were free, people of color, and re-ending them back into slavery, was also part of those wagon trains. This is some of the wagon trains that trails, the Catawba wagon train, the California one, the Mormons, the old Spanish trail. Again, most of these wagon trains, they have records. The records can be found in the General Land Office records, the Bureau of Land Management, and the General Land Office, and the records there in Washington, D.C. Now, all the wagon trains were documented. Some of them moved at night without letting people know, did not want to be caught up with some of the bandits and gangsters at that time that was robbing the trains and stuff. The next one basically is the California Gold Rush. Over 300,000 people rushed to California. Some African Americans struck gold. And again, as I stated before, we also had black cowboys during that time. The gold camps did not allow slavery at all, have slaves to work in the gold camp. And I can understand that, mainly because they weren't about whether or not they would steal the gold, steal some money, whatever, or run away with it, really. But over 1/3 of the 49ers pretty much died. It was a really hard and tough life. The orphan train took place. And again, the orphan train movement, this was went westward from New York area. One of the stops basically was the Chicago area. But out of that came 3 charter institutions, such as the Children Village, the Children Aid Society, and helping children. A lot of children were abandoned, abused, homeless, and basically, in a sense, they end up sending them out to people that were looking for children. And sadly, some of them abuse the children by having them working in different camps and places. The Contraband Camps, and most of us familiar with the Civil War. Again, the people that were enslaved when they were free, they followed the Union Army from one area to another. So people was on the movement. As the army was moving, they moved with the army, and they did different things with the army, really. But again, over 179,000 Black men served in the U.S. Army, and another 19,000 some served in the Navy. Nearly 40,000 Black soldiers pretty much died, and mainly from in the war, from the diseases, over 30 some odd thousand. But between 400,000 to 500,000 enslaved men and women basically pretty much were in the Union and occupied basically, some of the camps. And again, the Union Army ended up managing more than 100 some contraband camps. And to give you an idea what a contraband camp looks like, it mainly was just tents that was given to some of the slaves that was set free. Some of the jobs ranging from cooking, digging trenches, and et cetera, really. But some of the contraband camps today, places like in Alexandria, Virginia, and Fort Monroe and Hampton, the Roanoke Island, and then in New Bern, you had areas such as cities, black cities that started called James City, Freedom Hill, which were incorporated as Princeville in North Carolina in 1885, and that's in Tarboro, North Carolina, really. And going back to up to the Hampton area, one of the area, a young lady by the name of Mary Pick taught over 900 some odd contraband people how to read and write. And basically that is on today's site, which is Hampton University, was built after the war. But she was played a major role in that. And again, it's showing you the contraband cities, the red dots are some of the contraband camps. And today some of the major cities. The 13th Amendment came into play. We had, as I mentioned, in 1865, as you know, the abolishment of slavery took place. Some 4.5 million enslaved Africans was freed, and then came different laws, amendments that was put in place. The Freedom Bureau, formerly known as the Bureau of Refugee Freedom and Abandoned Land, was established, and that was like today's social service or welfare department, really. And again, it ended in 1872. Thousands of free slaves eventually had to go back to some of the plantations that they was born or even worked on to survive, really. Then Reconstruction came into play, and then you had the sharecropping system came into play also, riots, and later the Civil Rights Act of 1866. And then, as I stated before, some of the black codes came into play. And white supremacy groups, such as the Klans, were formed, and etc. In 1868, over 700,000 Blacks voted for President Grant in the Republican Party. And during this time, most of them followed the individual. They did not, wasn't because of the party, it was because of the individual that they followed, more so than the political party, really. And over 1,500 Blacks also were elected to different political office in South Carolina during that time, okay? And then in 1877, when the Federal troops left the South, Reconstruction came to a close. And right now, just to keep me from just going on, I'm gonna take questions, Martha. Let me take questions right now at this time, okay?
Okay, thank you, Lamar, for just opening up this history in such a remarkable way. We tend to be in the United States so Anglo-oriented that we just don't even think about this pre-Jamestown history. And you pointed that out so well. And thank you for that. It really just opens up the early history of people of African descent in America.
And Martha, yes, and you're right, because if you look at some of the lesson plans that you find in different universities and colleges and stuff, they most of them starts at 1619 if they're going to start as it relate to African Americans. And the point I was trying to make is that when I was researching my family, I went back to the 1600s, and I was surprised that some of them were not slaves. So you're right.
Yeah, well, and that's just something we all need to be aware of, that the history is much earlier, and it's the Spanish and the Portuguese, and it's the world history that is part of the history of of this country as well. And it just, you pointed that out so well, and thank you. And we have a few questions that we'll get to, and I just wanted to remark on, you mentioned the internal migration, the domestic migration, and we know that here in the area where in Winston-Forsyth County, we think of the Harston plantation, for example. The Harston family had major plantations in Stokes County and across the Dan River in Virginia, and also in Davie County, and they were one of the major slave owners and holders who expanded into the Deep South in the second migration you're talking about, and had major plantations in the Deep South. So that was another thing that you brought to us, was this major movement of people, and the major movement of people throughout time, which is fascinating. Thank you so much for that. And then, of course, the Liberia connection is very specific to Salem as well, from the 1830s, when enslaved people were manumitted and sent to Liberia. So that you've touched on just so much, I can't even respond to everything, but I would like to go to mention a few of our questions. And there was a remark from Tara Phelps Jones, who says, "I wish this information was included in history lessons and textbooks during my formative education years." And just back to the point that you're revealing so much to us. And I would like to remind you all that in the chat, there are 3 handouts from Mr. DeLoatch, and one of them is a timeline of the migration, which will be very valuable. You want to download. And also he has a listing of slave records and sources of information, because Brenda Fulmore is asked about in the Q&A about how to further narrow her search in her family tree. And I would suggest that the slave records handout that Mr. DeLoatch has will be very informative to you, Brenda. And also, Oggs, if you're interested in conversations with some of the very, very excellent researchers there, might be a help to you as well. And Irma Jackson has mentioned this interesting comparison of the 2 trails of tears that you brought to us, not only the Native Americans, but also people of African descent. And she was interested in that, and how they compared. And she also had a question about the 1/4 acre of land that was available to people. And she's wondering how people were able to get enough resources, money, to buy that land. Mr. DeLoatch.
Okay. And that's a good question. When I researched even some of my family members, I did not know that some of them was participating in apprenticeship programs by the slave owner. They were hired out to different plantations, and they shared in the profits in some cases. Okay. If there was a small plantation, and the guy, to give them an example, if they got their crops in before, they will be hired out to other plantations, large plantations, and the owners of large plantations end up paying the owner, and the owner in turn gave the enslaved African portion of that income. So a lot of them basically, in a sense, worked and were also received money. But you also had a lot of free people that was paid, were not paid a good salary, but they were paid some, and they eventually pooled their money together, and so they were able to save up money and different things, really, and that was on some of the stuff that took place. And then and even if you look at today, you got some Black-owned families that got air property, and they wonder, well, how did mom, grandfather, or great-grandfather end up with property, end up with that? I also found out as I mentioned, came up to 1870 when also the 1870 was the first census that African-American has surnames, and I stopped there for questions. But even during that time, some of the enslaved people end up with reparations. Let me explain that to you, okay? Because some of the large plantation owners could not farm their land, attend their land. So basically what happened was some other people were given, they became sharecroppers, as I mentioned earlier. But out of that, deals were cut with that, stating that, hey, if you, I'll give you 1 acre or 2 acres if you stay on the plantation, after the end of slavery. And some of them did. And that's how people, in my family, I found over 30 some in the 18th census owning land, and mainly because the DeLoatch slave owner family gave them 2 and 3 acres of land to work and grow stuff and sell things.
Thank you so much. We're having, as you're talking, we're having some conversations in the chat. Daniel Ackerman has posted those documents from Mr. DeLoatch, which I thought you all could see, but he has reposted them, and he'll also add the timeline, which will be helpful. And several people are asking about how to learn more from you, Mr. DeLoatch, and I would suggest that they become members of OGS and this network of people. I have to tell you all, I as the representative for Old Salem, I attend the monthly meetings, and each meeting has incredible resources and information from speakers that are brought in or from within the organization. So I would encourage you all to become a member of OGS. And if you're not local to the Piedmont-Triad, as I mentioned earlier, there are 3 additional chapters in North Carolina. So I would suggest that, it's a network of people. And as Mr. DeLoatch will tell you, the organization includes people who are really, really good at this, and they share readily.
True.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see. Here's a question from a history teacher, April Donovan, who says that she's traced some of her DNA back to Liberia. How can I find more information on Liberia? Well, we have ship list, right? Because we've found manifests with people's names.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just quickly, on that, we have a young man that was that member of our chapter, last name Johnson. Last name is Johnson. And he was born in Liberia, but he found out that his grandparents was born in America, and he was totally confused. And now he's in America, and he goes like, well, how can my grandparents be in America? And my parents were born in Liberia, and I was born in Liberia. Well, to make a long story short, they were part of the Liberian movement, and he's back now. And here in Greensboro, now he is trying to find out their connection to the plantations and things here in America, really. So you have that back and forth movement that is not talked about.
Right, and we have, there's a large Liberian population in the Winston-Salem, the Piedmont-Triad area, the Liberian organization, the Piedmont, led by Olu Brown and James Hunder. And so there are resources, there are people here who fled the country during the Civil Wars. And so there are networks here as well. And here's a question from Kristen Redfield, who teaches a course on the Gullah Geechee. Also want to mention other historically present African origin people groups. Do you have other resources that Kristen can investigate with regard to African origin people? And I know that on the OGS website, you all list all kinds of resources. So that may be a place for Kristen to go. And I hope you all saw, I'm sorry you're not seeing the things I'm putting in the chat, but I had put the OGS, I had put the OGS website address in there. I'll try to do that again. Daniel, I don't know why some of my things aren't showing. But if you could help me with that, I'd appreciate it. But once again, I would encourage you all to join OGS. So Mr. DeLoatch, are you ready to continue on with the
Yes,
second half?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you all. We'll get back to more questions in a little bit.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Martha. As I mentioned before, 1870 census, enslaved Africans were recognized with surnames. Okay, and before I start, basically, one of the myths that was that the enslaved Africans took their master surnames. Again, not all enslaved Africans took their master's surname, especially if they was abusive or whatever. I found out that a lot of Africans took the master enslaved name mainly for tracking purposes. One of the things that helped me was that I followed the enslaved Africans from one state to another state, in my case with the DeLoatch side of the family. And my grandmother told me a story that her uncle, but I'm sorry, her mother's brother, okay, which is your uncle, that helped him to get back from Mississippi and Alabama back to North Carolina, because as a little boy, his mother told him, just remember, you are a DeLoatch, you came from the DeLoatch plantation, and he kept that name. So it was tracking in my family side, on the DeLoatch side, for my family to keep that name so that they could bring us back together again. But moving along, after the 1870, during the 1870s to the 1960s, we had a period of Jim Crow, which most of you are familiar with, dealt with slavery. And again, people was on the movement because of Jim Crow, the Jim Crow period. We had lynching from 1882 to 1968, or 4,743 Black lynchings that took place. And believe it or not, no one was charged even during that whole entire period for lynching at all. Then we had 1885. Most southern states had law requiring schools for Blacks and whites. Okay. Again, the chain gang was instituted mainly to help build highways through 1890. Okay. Then in 1890, again, in 1890, there was no census. Some people, when I visited the National Archives at that time, James, trying to think of his name now, he was one of the, I can't think of his name now, but he was one of the curators there in the library, really, made a statement that I think that a lot of it has to do with, because that census lists, who's your father, who, whatever listed really, and a lot of enslaved people were listing some slave owners as their fathers and parents. So during that whole year, pretty much almost local records, state records, national records were burnt. So the census was destroyed. Ida B. Wells played a major role in the lynching and bringing it to people's attention during the lynching. The daughter of the Confederacy, basically, these were basically certain white women who were back in 1894. And basically what they were doing, they were paying tribute to their grandparents and even some of their parents, basically, for participating in the Civil War. And then that's when I think a lot of the statues became permanent throughout the United States. And between 1898 to 1898 to 1908, there were less than 10,000 Black registered men voting in 12 southern states. And you have to understand it was pressure on Black people to for voting. Over 150 some Black-owned cities and towns were destroyed. People don't talk about Wilmington, North Carolina, but Wilmington was one of the first. You had towns such as Greenwood, Oklahoma, Tulsa, race riots back then, Rosewood, and so forth down the line, really. And you said to yourself, where did the people go? So if you're searching for people, okay, and you're looking in the, I said 1900 census, you know, and all of a sudden you don't see them, you know, where are they? Where did they go? And what happened to them? And one of the reasons why I put a lot of emphasis on the Wilmington massacre, this is a newspaper article that you see here, and et cetera, really, because that set the whole stage for future massacre that took place in other cities such as Greenwood, Tulsa, and places like that, really. And again, you know, it was an angry mob. You had Black Republicans during that time in Wilmington. Wilmington was had the most Black officials than any other city in the United States. You know, it beat out New Orleans during that time, really. In 1897, 56% of the city population were Black. Okay, today in Wilmington, only 18% of Wilmington is Black. Okay, then you had basically then also doing that, thousands of Blacks was forced out of the city. The police chief that was Black, the mayor, they were all, you know, some were killed, bodies were dumped into the Cape Fear River. And one of the reasons why I'm familiar with that, because my wife's family was part of that whole piece. Okay, and they basically they were my wife's family were teachers and educators, and they tried to protect a lot of the folks. Even her great-great-grandfather was one of the ministers there, and so down the line. William McKinley was president at the time, did nothing with that, really. And again, you know, when you start looking at, you know, during the 19th census, and start looking at 19th census, and you said, okay, I found them in 1870 and 1880. Why can't I find them in the 1900 census? Because thousands of Blacks basically were missing. They had left the city of Wilmington, North Carolina, really. White supremacy prevent the Blacks from voting once they took over and holding office, really. Also, during the whole Jim Crow period, there was a lot of literacy going on. People could not read nor write, and that's why the newspaper, Black newspaper, were burnt down, really. The message got out to the white supremacy group through cartoons and et cetera, because they couldn't read, and et cetera, really. So, you know, if you look at basically during this time, the state of North Carolina basically had 126,000 some registered Black voters, and after the women massacred or whatever, this is a state now, okay? They were down to 6,000 some registered voters in the state of North Carolina. Okay, so again, during the 1900s and the 1910 census, whatever you will find probably won't find your people, mainly because they went in hiding, okay, because of this, okay, or they moved from Wilmington to somewhere else. Someone went north, okay, and et cetera, really. The 1900s, basically, again, you know, you had people of color that was required to be separate from whites in railroad cars, hotels, theaters, and et cetera, really. And this is a scary thing. Over 237 Black sharecroppers in Elaine, Arkansas, were slaughtered by the U.S. Army in 1919, okay? And I mentioned about Tulsa, Oklahoma. A lot of you all know about Tulsa, Oklahoma, but over some Black people were killed during that day. Okay. And again, you had thousands of homeowners. Homes were destroyed by fire and businesses that were destroyed, really. In 1934, Eleanor Roosevelt basically played a major part working with Walter White, okay, dealing with the anti-lynching piece and et cetera, really, and that played a major role. And each one of these states, you'll see lynchings that took place during this time, really. And again, the reason why I bring that up is because if you're looking for a family member and all of a sudden you end up in a dead end, really, you may need to say, hey, like I was shocked when I looked into some of the lynching records and things that took place in the court records, okay, and that's really, so basically what I put down, the Confederacy lost the Civil War, but they won the battle, okay. The next one is the Great Black Migration, okay, from 1910 to 1970, which I was a part of this also in the end. And again, from 1910 to 1930, you had those 7 million Afro-American moved out of the rural areas into the Northeast and Midwest and West cities, really. This was like in 1930, you also had a second wave of people up to the 70s. Black Americans basically switched parties from 1936 to even to 1964. But and again, because the enslaved, the descendants of enslaved people did not vote party, they vote the person. And when they were switching, a lot of people was, oh, they switched from this back and forth, but they voted on the person, okay? And even today, sometimes it basically on the person, not the party, okay? You had post-World War II era, 1945, that took place. But then again, this is the Great Black Migration pattern, a movement from those Southern Confederate states, the way that people moved. From 1916 to 1918, you had over 400,000 Afro-American migrated north. In 1916, even the Pennsylvania Railroad helped more than 10,000 Afro-American move in order to employ them also, okay? And again, some of the cities, again, Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, St. Louis, Cleveland, and Indianapolis. Over 20 million whites left the South and the city also. And again, I'm just showing 2 segments of people moving because there were some liberal whites that was having problems going along with some of the white supremacy stuff that was happening in the South also. This was the largest internal movement, basically, in American population right now that had to basically jobs, again, in the industrial North, also was the driving force behind some of the great Black movement also. And this is kind of give you an idea of how people moved from one state to another state, from one area or whatever, really, like I listened to Michelle Obama talk about how folks went up from Alabama up to Chicago. Just kind of give you the idea about the movement of people. So if you're looking at the, say, 1910 census and 1920 census, okay, the movement had just started. So again, they may have been in Alabama basically in 1900, but then again, in the 1920 census, they may be in Chicago. As I mentioned earlier, Marcus Garvey, again, was on the second, and he was part of the Great Black Migration. Again, his program, Back to Africa movement in the 1940s. The Dust Bowl, it may sound strange, but again, more than 300,000 people during the Dust Bowl moved to California from Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Arkansas, Colorado, and New Mexico. And I had somebody one day ask me, like, were Black people in New Mexico? Yes, we were. we were there. This was high winds, choking dust storms, and et cetera, really. And again, this went from Texas to dealing with Nebraska. People and livestock and crops failed throughout the entire region, really. Again, now Afro-Americans basically, also like I said, Oklahoma and Arkansas and Texas, someone left during the 1930s and went to the northern cities. Again, the Great Depression, and okay. And the Dust Bowl, basically what it was really, it just turned everything to dust. And that's in those cities, states, and that's why people moved again. The Civil Rights Movement played a major role dealing with Black America, and focusing on ending racial discrimination and try to gain equal rights under the law. The first person that attracted me basically was a Philip Randolph in the 1941s. I grew up thinking that Martin Luther King was the first person that marched on Washington. Come find out under the president of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, A. Philip Randolph led the first one, really. Some 1.5 million African Americans left the South during the 1940s. Between 1945 and 1950, Seattle, Washington, Black folks moved to Seattle mainly during the Cold War period, really, and mainly because of jobs and military and commercial aircrafts were built there. So, and a lot of them moved there mainly for jobs, really. And again, from the South. So, look in Seattle, Washington. Okay. In 1950, the NAACP, National Defense League, basically by Thurgood Marshall, again, went on to try to battle the racial segregation through the courts. And again, we had murders such as Emmett Till during that time. And when people found out that they did not have that much rights and what was going on, a lot of them started to move from the Mississippi area, from that area. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King in 1957 created the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to deal basically with some of the civil rights struggles that we was facing and going on. And again, things such as urban renewal came into play during the 1950s and the early 1960s. And this displaced over millions of Black people. And they use what they call public domain for this. That's the term that they use. And this is what the public domain looked like even today, when you had highways coming through Black communities. And I picked out this one here, here in Miami, Florida area, and they called it Overtown. Okay, it was a neighborhood there. And again, it had go over 30,000 Blacks, less than by 1950 and the 60s, down to 10,000. So where are the other 20,000? Where did they go? Okay, so if you're looking at the 1950 census coming up more or less, and you're looking at the 1960 census, you're gonna go like, where are they? And so forth down the line, really. And this kind of give you the idea of the major highways, the 95s, the 40s, the 70s, and et cetera, really. And they set it up by saying for national defense purposes, okay, and et cetera, really. So that took place. The person that I admire basically, and we don't give him much credit for, Dorothy Heights, who became the president of the National Council on Negro Women, really. And the sad piece about that is that, again, was not allowed to speak at the I Have a Dream, Martin Luther King, at the March on Washington during that time, really. But again, I commend her and her ability to basically, in a sense, to help people, help families to and move, et cetera, really. 80% of the 100 largest metropolitan suburbs such as Los Angeles, New York, okay, basically during this time, basically in Chicago or whatever, they account for the minorities, really account to be population gain during this time in those cities. The Summer Project in Mississippi in 1964 was 700 mostly whites joined African Americans in Mississippi to fight against white. They actually moved there. So people again moved from the north to the south. Okay, so you may not say, "Hey, I'm not going to look for them," because I know they didn't go back to the south. They did. Then you had the Civil Rights Act of 1965, the voting right that took place on the LBJ, but you also had the what you call the 1968 Southern Strategy piece. And that was the piece that put it in place, and it still affects us today on voting suppression and et cetera, really. Integration during the 1960s, and you had white exiting the city, okay, and going to the rural areas, suburban areas to the rural areas. Black power came into play in the 60s and the 70s. And I tell people, you know, segregation made folks to kind of basically, you know, people thinking, okay, we separated, but then again, integration basically pretty much toward support. During the 1970s, New York, Illinois, Chicago, again, during the 70s, most of the African Americans people that was located. And one of the reasons, you know, when you had the white folks exiting the city, or the people which have the resources and the money and everything else basically left, and you had Black leaders that try to take over and et cetera. And some, you know, when you don't have resources, you can't really succeed that much, especially money and et cetera, really. But now we have what we call the second, I tell people now, the second domestic migration that is taking place in the 1990s, okay, to present day. And this is the Black migration reverse back to the South. And again, because of the decaying ghettos, poverty, okay, that are basically appearing, and you're getting almost a complete quiet return, reshaping the region. You still have Black mass incarceration. But when you look at from 2005 to 2010, basically, in a sense, you see a gain in the South of 600,000 Blacks on a yearly basis. Many coming from Northeast areas, flowing down to the Midwest and the Western area. And this is to kind of give you a gain and loss chart of white folks moving, Black folks moving, different areas really. And again, when you look at the domestic migration piece, you look at North Carolina right now, we are in a gain area, okay, 320,000, 631, okay. But then again, when you look at the loss area, you go looking at places like New York that's losing people and et cetera, really. So that's what the political people now are wrestling with, and redrawing districts and things like that, really. And when they do that, they displace us when they do that, because they draw lines or they come up with other strategies, really. And basically, you're having a lot of college retired people. I'm one of those, retired people that have pretty much moved back from the north. I tell people in 1970, I graduated from Elizabeth City. I was in North Carolina. So during the census, will show you that in 1970, I was in North Carolina. In 1980, I was in the state of Massachusetts. In 1990, I was in New York. These are the years of the census, okay? And then the year 2000, I'm back in North Carolina again. So we as people really move back and forth, east and west. And then 2012, the death of Trayvon Martin. And when you have these type of events, type of things that are taking place, people either move from them when they feel that the local government is not doing anything. And so we're down the line really, and all the way down to George Floyd that is taking place. Black Lives Matter came into play in a sense. And again, this is a percentage of people living in the American South. You can see it, see what is taking, what's going on, okay? And then you starting to see in 2010, okay, uptick going back up. The population, I tell people, from about 5 million in 1870 African Americans to 42 million African American in 2019. Native American over 60 million, okay, in 1492 to about 6 million now during the 1900s. And again, the reason why I put those two in there because, you know, sometimes people, you know, go like, you know, DeLoatch, you talk about Native American, you talk about this and that, so really, you know, and I tell people, you know, I look at myself as an African American with I look at myself as American with African American and Native American descent, and that's how I look at me when I look in the mirror, and etc. And I tell people, you know, you look at the whole people, you know, what took place. They tried to bury us, but they didn't not know that we were seized. And again, that is what will happen. And the types of plantations that we own, I tell people, if you're paying $7.25 an hour, a job plan during the day and time, it's a plantation. And people are gonna move. People, if they better themselves, they're gonna move. Okay, people, you know, in a sense, from the 1860, 80% of the US national product gross basically retired to slavery during the 1860. Okay. Again, you need to know your history to do genealogy, because I found out when I first started, really, even after interviewing people, you know, if you don't know the history of the area, this is my genealogical chart. And I assume they put one of the blank charts in the chat room. But this is a, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 generation chart, okay? I can take my African American side back 11 generations, okay? I can take it back, I said, on my African American enslaved person back to a lady by the name of Isabel, okay, that were born 1718 here in the United States. My European side, I can take it all the way back to 1600, okay? And so for now, really, so that I can do, really. And I tell people, you know, these are some of the people here for us, how they related to me. If you're my 6th cousin, you relate to me on Daniel's side. You're my 8th cousin, you relate to on Isabel, who was born 1718. And again, my 9th cousin, you would be born. So I'm just showing you basically, in a sense, this whole thing. And again, when you look at Isabel, she's my 7th great grandparent, okay, 10th generation, okay. And then again, your chart, okay, these are the names that I found pretty much in every southern state, misspelled, and that's the type of stuff, really. And the reason why they were misspelled, mainly because people could not read, people could not write, and they went by what this sounds like. That's why when you go to the National Archives, you have to look at the sound decks. The sound decks will help you with the name. This is a map trekking out from 1645 to present. I follow the white, I have to call them my ancestors, because I found out that, and even through DNA documented, that the DeLoatches, okay, the white DeLoatches are related to the enslaved Africans and vice versa, okay? And this is our trek. I followed the slave owners, okay, and this is the path all the way down to Louisiana. Okay. And again, these are our plantations with the DeLoatch plantations that were located in the different states. Tennessee, you name it. This is my DNA chart. I'm 86.3% Saharan Africa, all around to Native America. Okay. And again, these are the countries. My top country is Nigeria. Okay. The 13th country is, okay, Ireland. And again, all this was documented basically through DNA. All the way back, basically, I tell people, to my 90th country, which is Ghana. Okay. And that's really. And then you look at my 65th country, basically, Gasai Beni. I'm sorry, Guinea-Bissau, which is Guinea Jack, which in the census it was referred to as Jack Collins, and he was brought from Africa to the Somerset plantation, okay, on the ship Camden, on the Camden ship, okay, and again the DNA thing really. Well, I use a statement from Bob Marley: if you know your history, then you will know where you're coming from. Then you wouldn't have to ask me, who the heck do you think I am? And again, thank you, Martha, for having me. Do we have any questions?
Oh, Lamar, bravo. Thank you so much. This has been remarkably informative, as I know all the listeners here, our attendees would say. And I would like to ask a few of the questions. I want to go back to something I said in the first break when I was talking about, when you were talking about the migration, domestic migration, I mentioned the Harston family. The Harston family, that's the white name. The people of African descent associated with that family are Hairstons. And I know there are many Hairstons in our community. So I just wanted to make that distinction, Harston, Hairston, in our area and then in the Deep South. So I want to go to some of our questions, and someone said something about not knowing about the interstate highway impacts that you mentioned and that great map that you showed about the Eisenhower interstate system. I put in the chat a piece about Happy Hill that shows the impact of Highway 52 on it. And it shows a redlining map of Winston-Salem from 1937 and how Interstate 40 and Highway 52 basically ran across African-American neighborhoods and eradicated much of East Winston and the Blue Street neighborhood, certainly. But I would offer that to you. It's in the chat. It's a PDF I just posted. So we're certainly dealing with the impacts of that now in terms of recognizing that entire communities were obliterated and people were displaced in a really major way. So that's certainly a current situation. One of the questions that gets back to earlier in this session, Tara Phelps Jones asks, Mr. DeLoatch, what made Blacks want to stay in the South as opposed to migrating?
I think what happened is some of them really found out that the North was not what they, expected it to be. And a lot of them basically came back and told the other one, you're better off here. I give people this story sometimes. I said during the summer, I would go visit my aunt in New York City, and I remember my first time going there, and all of a sudden, because they would come down with nice cars and nice outfits and everything else, really. But what happened was when I turned the age of 16, my mom sent me there to stay with my aunt. And when I got there, I was looking for the car to pick me up. I was looking for, and I think Black American can relate to this. And when I got to the house, I wanted something to eat and opened up the refrigerator, and the only thing in there was a bottle of water. And I realized that they put on a show for us when they came down south. And I couldn't understand why they would take pretty much all the meat from the smokehouse and everything else and take back and so forth down the line. But later on, I realized that they were really struggling, but led us to believe that they were making it because they went to the South. Now, the only reason why the people in the North didn't really want to send their children down South was because of an Emmett Till situation, okay? They didn't want to send them down there because they knew how it was really, and they had not prepared their children for what to do or what to say and that type of stuff.
Well, that's interesting, and personal experiences certainly mean a lot. So thank you for sharing that. And some of the comments say that people can relate to what you experienced as well. I want to go to a comment and question from Kristen Redfield, who says, what would you suggest that I tell my African-American students who believe that they cannot trace their history during slavery due to the lost records? Is there a good beginner approach? I will send them to the OG site, but is there anywhere else that is good for starters?
I tell people, when you today, I mean, I get, and Martha can tell you, I get hundreds of calls a day, emails, you name it, and it's like, I did my DNA. The kids today likes to go from A to Z looking for their family. So they go and do DNA, and then they found out I'm Saharan Africa and so forth down the line. But then they don't know what's in the middle. And I tell them, you have to put boots on the ground. Now, DNA is a good start, okay, because it gets you talking. So I normally tell teachers, you want to get a good conversation about race, have your class to do a DNA, okay, or get a project money to raise money to do a DNA so that you can start talking about it, so that you can, so that the people can see that they have more, whether you black or white, alike than because a lot of people don't think that we share the same, DNA at times, okay, where we, do we have Saharan Africa in us, or do we have European in us and whatever. But when they start seeing that they have similarities, then they'll start become inquisitive about what do I need to do. So basically, in a sense, so the first step, basically, interview, talk to your parents, interview them, interview your grandparents, okay? And when you start doing that, really, and once you start doing that, I think that will basically get it. Now, the reason why a lot of parents don't talk to you about what's going on, they don't know themselves. That's the reason why right now the African-American genealogical societies right now and research pieces right now is one of the biggest hobby among African-Americans now, because they are learning how to do this and what to do. There are records. There are thousands, there are hundreds of records. I tell white genealogical societies, the difference between Black genealogical societies is the records that we research. And I give you a few of those that we do research. But we also have a lot in common, okay? And believe me, get away from some of that myth that's out there, okay? It's a lot of myth out there that people are getting totally confused with, okay? I mean, I tell people that, I was told that, when it came to dealing with my Native American side, really that, grandparents, they were Blackfoot Indians. Well, when you do your history, you find out that the Blackfoot Indians were only located in Alberta, Canada area, okay? Out in Montana area, more or less in that area. They never crossed the Appalachian Mountains. So, and grab a good history book. My mentor was Dr. John Hope Franklin, who wrote From Slave to Freedom. I first met him at Elizabeth City. He came to speak. He was a professor at Duke. He came to speak to us. And he became really a mentor of mine, really. I mean, I really basically, in a sense, so find out basically in a sense what's going on, really. But the bottom line with young people is you're gonna have to put boots, as I call it, on the ground.
Well, thank you so much for that. And that is exactly right. It requires some research. And we've posted in the chat these documents that Mr. DeLoatch shared, the timeline of all these migrations that he's discussed today, some clues to slave records that you can access, and also the pedigree chart that you saw he had included for his own family. That's posted as well, and it's a good starting point. And I would think with students in your class, you could hand that out and get them started on talking to their parents and their grandparents. But certainly oral history is incredibly important, and it plays a huge role in what we can learn about our families. So that is certainly a start. I've also posted in the chat the link to the page on the OGS website where they list resources and links to those resources. So I would encourage you to go there as well. OGS provides so much information just right there on their website. And I'll also add that as a member, if you're a member of OGS and you attend the monthly meetings, at each meeting, Mr. DeLoatch gives out a free DNA kit for 23andMe. A drawing is held every meeting to give one of these out. So he is supporting what he's suggesting, which is, do your DNA. And in one of the Q&As, Brenda Fulmore mentioned her, and she discusses her DNA results, and hers are very much like yours, Mr. DeLoatch, in terms of Africa and Ireland and places like that. And she's interested in further research for her family tree. So sort of in a nutshell, Mr. DeLoatch, since we're coming to the end here, where do people start? Would you suggest they go to the OGS website just to sort of get an idea of some of the resources out there, join OGS, things like that? From today forward, I guess is what I'm saying.
I think what you need to do is take that pedigree chart, okay, and call your auntie, your grandmother, your grandfather, and start asking them questions, okay, and again, if they don't know, you ask, okay, what town were you born in, or whatever. And most towns have courthouses, and they have records. They have birth records, they have death records. And then you can move on to the state archives and the state genealogical library, or your local library. Now, your local library also have information if you're from that area, really. But the best thing, to be honest with you, is take that chart, that pedigree chart that I gave you. I refer to it as a pedigree chart, but it is also a family history chart. I tell people there are two types of chart, a pedigree chart and a family chart. Pedigree is blood. Family is basically, that may be an adopted person or whoever you want, okay, that may have raised you and you don't know. And I tell adopted individuals, if you want to try to find your adopted parents, you may want to do a genealogy piece, and that's through GEDmatch, but you have to do a DNA first, and so forth down the line, really. And again, as I stated earlier, believe me, the records are there. You just got to find them. Okay. And again, check with grandmama. She may have it in the Bible. Okay. A funeral program, whatever, it is there. And some of the older and the elder family members, okay, have that information. My mom kept stacks of funeral programs, and I can understand, why are you gonna keep all this? Okay. I found out basically when I started, in 1978, why she kept them, because she was saving them for me, which I didn't think I was gonna be involved in.
Well, and that's another good point, which is for all of us to think about saving information as an archive for our descendants and for the future.
Yeah.
To organize information that you already have and share with children in your lives. Would you say that's probably a good thing to do too?
Yeah. I'll go to Old Salem.
That's right. Well, Thank you for that. And I've put my email address in the chat, and I hope that people who have ancestry here in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County will come and do some research with us. I just want to say, Mr. DeLoatch, that the people are just leaving amazing comments in the chat. Awesome, Mr. DeLoatch, Mr. President. So inspiring. Thank you so much. Really appreciate this. So helpful for my students. Just on and on. And it's just been an honor, Mr. DeLoatch, to host you today. And I want to let you all know.
Martha, can I
go
say
ahead.
one thing? Okay. What I found out, okay, because this summer, I spent some time with some young people because I really want some young people involved, really. And what I'm finding out that even some of the, when you do that pedigree chart, you deal with the maiden names of women. And what I found out that I had 9, 10 to 15 years old individuals, they did not know their grandmother maiden name. They only knew granny, but they did not know their maiden name at all. Okay. And some of them didn't even know the name. They just know, oh, her name is Aunt this and Aunt this and whatever. And I'm going like, you don't know her name? Well, no, because it's granny. I go like, granny what? So again, that pedigree chart is a start.
Yeah, well, that's a great point. In our society, the maternal line gets buried because maiden names don't usually carry it. They are more and more now, but that's a great point. And certainly the pedigree chart is a wonderful starting point for young people and children to begin this discovery process and to say, Granny, what is your name? And
What's your name?
Yeah, what's your name? I call you Granny and I love you, but what is your name? And that's a great point. And a comment here from a longtime genealogist, James Gist here says, I find that wills of slave owners will list slaves by name and can be a way to trace relatives from family to family. And once again, this gets back to sometimes you have to go through the white people to get to the Black people. And we certainly find that in Old Salem in our research. So, you know, cast your net wide is what I tell our interns and our volunteers.
And I tell people, especially people of color and African Americans really, and I at times make that presentation, it's okay to visit the plantation. And sometimes people have a tendency to go like, I'm not gonna talk about no plantation. I don't know that really. But I tell people, you know, I mean, our records are not locked up in vaults or are not in the archives. It may be in the hands of your former slave owners. And they still have them in attics, in basements and places like that. So you're gonna have to build that relationship, that partnership with them, okay? To let them know that you're not a threat, okay? Don't come to them as a threat. You just come to them to find out more about your family and so forth down the line, really. And I tell people, when you start talking about 50 acres and a mule and my reparation and so forth down the line, you know, you're gonna turn them off. And I tell universities and colleges and institutions of higher learning, if you're talking about reparation, you need to talk about scholarship, internship, fellowship, okay? Yeah. That basically would eventually lead that individual to jobs, okay? Didn't cost you that much, whatever. And George, now, like I said, Georgetown is following that, okay? That piece and so forth down the line, really. And it's allowing everybody basically who wants to go to college, you can, okay? But again, you have to put some work in it. You have to put some boots on the ground. You know, you're gonna have to, get through high school to prove that, hey, I'm worthy of going to college, okay? Not that you owe me something and then go from there.
Well, thank you for that point. And I'll mention the University Studying Slavery Consortium. Wake Forest University and Guilford College will be hosting the spring symposium this March and April. You can go online to find out about that. And this has to do with schools investigating their slave past. Mr. DeLoatch, thank you so much for being with us this morning. It was a remarkable presentation, and we are so thankful. This has been recorded and I believe will be available. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Daniel Ackerman, and he will conclude for us. Thank you so much.
Well,
thank you, Mr. DeLoatch. Thank you, Martha. I mean, what a fascinating thing. And I love that this final slide says to be continued, because there's always more to go. We cast our nets wide. We talk to our elders. We gather the information. I think these kinds of programs where we partner with organizations like OGS are a great way to teach people how to find where they come from, how to ground them in the past, which is something that we are focused on very much here with our Hidden Town project, to research and reveal the legacy of the African-American people who once called this place Salem home, but also to create the tools for people to find their own histories, wherever it is their families come from. So thank you both again so much. Thank you so much, Mr. DeLoatch, for spending your time with us this Saturday morning. And thank you to our audience who have joined us this morning. From the comments, from the questions, I suspect everybody has learned something new and is eager to go out, cast their nets, fill out their charts, and continue their genealogical research journey. If you'd like to learn more about the Hidden Town Project, I invite you to visit our website, oldsalem.org. There you'll find information about the kinds of records we have here on site and the kinds of questions Martha and others in our research centers can help you answer. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Saturday, a great weekend, and will join us again for another program in the near future. Thanks a lot and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.